Hello, we are going to go over the scientific method, or at least review it. First off, why do we use the scientific method? Well, that's to generate scientific theories that help us to better understand the world, and then to make sure that the theories are well supported. First off, scientific method, there's like 5 things. First off, you ask a question. You form a hypothesis. You can use your hand. There's 5 parts. So you ask a question, you form a hypothesis. The hypothesis is just kind of like your educated guess based on what you've experienced, observed, researched. And usually it starts with, if I do this, then this will happen. Or if this happens, then this should happen. Then you're going to design and construct an experiment. You're going to do that experiment to test your hypothesis. And this thing, when you construct it, you want to make sure that other people can follow along your instructions and do exactly what you did to replicate whatever you did so that they could potentially get the same results. And that's the whole point of making these experiments and testing and proving your theory correct. All right, then you're going to analyze it. So analyze. Question, hypothesis, experiment, analyze. So you're going to look at all that data that you got from that experiment, and you're going to see, were you right, were you wrong, did you do something that could have affected whatever your results were. And then you're going to draw your conclusion. Based on all of that analysis, looking at all that data and seeing what you did, what you didn't do, you're going to come up with your conclusion. Did your hypotheses happen, or do you have to change it? Or do you have to come up with a new experiment? Do you have to fix something? Do you have to make a whole new hypothesis? So 5 things: question, hypothesis, experiment, analyze, conclude. And here's the thing, with your conclusions, those equal theories because they are backed with evidence from your experiment. And that's important. Anytime you have any scientific method, any experiment, any theory, it needs to get backed with evidence from multiple experiments. All right. So just giving kind of like that, some vocab words that you probably have seen before, just reviewing. Hypothesis. What exactly is a hypothesis? That's just your educated guess about the question that you had. Because you definitely come up with a question so that you can answer it with your hypothesis. So question, hypothesis. And then you got to make an experiment. In the experiment, you're going to have an experimental group and a controlled group to be able to test the variable, the independent variable, and measure it, get that data for the dependent variable. All right, so experimental group, that's the one that you're experimenting on. But then you want to have a control group. That's one that isn't getting tested or having like the placebo effects. Say a sugar pill versus a caffeine pill, something like that. You have to have a control group that isn't taking anything to make sure your data is matching up. It is more reliable. And then the important words, you've got the dependent and independent variable. The dependent is the thing that you measure. And you have to make sure when you're coming up with any of these theories or questions or hypotheses, you have to have something to measure. And then you can figure out the independent variable. And here's the thing, you only want one. You only want to change one thing. This is the variable you change. You don't want to have different soils and then 2 different soils, 2 different plants, and then one's going to have Miracle-Gro and one's not, and you're going to be testing to see if Miracle-Gro works. Well, you have a bunch of different variables, different seeds, different soil, and that can affect it. You want to only change one thing at a time and then measure based off of that. All right. To see if your question is a good question, you have to have the following. It can't be an opinion. I think this. That's really not, it can't be answered with an opinion. Like, what's your favorite color? I think that the school's favorite color is going to be red or something like that. It has to be measurable, right? Like, you don't want an opinion. Opinions are not what you want. You want to go for facts. The answer is measurable. That thing, height, length, width, speed, volume, temperature, any of those things work with measurable amounts. And again, I can't stress the amount that your question cannot be an opinion. And so let's see. Is this a testable question? Which is prettier, a sunrise or a sunset? Now, is this opinion or is this fact-based? Well, first off, pretty is an opinion. So it's not fact-based, so you can't really measure it. However, I could switch it. If I poll Franklin Town students, will more students think the sunrise is prettier or a sunset? Now I can measure how many think it is this versus how many think it is that. If I add fertilizer to soil, will sunflower plants grow better? Well, it sounds good, except for this better thing. How about if I add fertilizer to soil, will sunflower plants grow taller? So instead of saying better, which is opinion, taller, I can measure that. I can measure with a ruler. Determine which of these is a testable question. Rewrite the questions that are not testable. So if I compare metals, which will be heavier? Aluminum, steel, or gold? Is that going to be testable? Absolutely, because I can measure with weight, the weight of these metals. If I compare flowers, which is prettier, a blue flower or a red flower? That's really not testable. That is an opinion. So instead, if I poll the class, how many students will think that a blue flower is prettier than a red flower? I've reworded it so there's a poll so I can count those opinions. All right. Which is the best kind of fertilizer? Miracle-Gro or compost? This is really hard to measure. Great question. Not a good testable question though. You could say, does Miracle-Gro grow taller plants than compost? Or does compost grow taller plants than Miracle-Gro? Or does Miracle-Gro produce more fruit than compost? Something like that. It's so you can have a measurable aspect. What brand of basketball is best? Which basketball brand bounces the highest? That's a good testable question. Let's identify a hypothesis. The hypothesis has to be clearly right or wrong. You can't give an ambiguous answer. Like, I think that maybe this one will. No, this one's going to be. You have to be direct. Using an if-then statement. If you do this, then this will happen. If this was done, this will happen. It is clear. It is saying this is what I believe is going to happen. Hypothesis. A statement that proposes an explanation to a question. Salt in soil may affect plant growth. I don't like that may. It's ambiguous. If salt is added to soil, then plants will not grow as tall. That, no ambiguity, and you're saying exactly what you believe will happen. And it's measurable. Bacterial growth may be affected by temperature. How about if temperature is increased, then bacterial growth will grow faster. You can absolutely count that. So that's really, really good. Change these to if-then. If cats are given catnip, then they may become hyper. I don't like become. They will run longer, run around longer. I would change that right there. They will do this. Gatorade might help you run longer than water. If I drink Gatorade, then I will run longer than if I drank water. If I study for a test, I may do better. If I study for a test, I will get an 85 or higher. I will. My plants might grow taller if I use compost instead of Miracle-Gro. If I use compost, then my plants will grow taller than Miracle-Gro. Okay, organizing our data. Identify the independent and dependent variable. Independent, thing you're measuring. Dependent, the thing you changed. Yes. No, I switched it. Independent is the thing you changed. Dependent is the thing you measure. You got to have a data table to put the data in. Pick the chart and graph that create a scale key and label the axes. Always label the axes. Always label the chart or graph. Transfer the chart data, into the graph. All right. A student performed a laboratory experiment to determine the effects of temperature on the heart rate of a water mosquito. The following temperatures and heart rates were recorded. Pardon me. Organize the data into a data table. Include the title for each variable. Independent, what changed? Dependent, it's supposed to be measure. That's weird. What did you measure? 20 degrees Celsius, 260 beats. 10 degrees Celsius, 154. 15 degrees Celsius, 200 beats. 25 degrees Celsius, 300 beats. 5 degrees Celsius, 102 beats. So I'm going to want my independent on the left, my dependent on the right. You're always going to want to set it up that way, what you changed, what you measured. So what I changed was the Celsius. I changed the temperature. What I measured was the beats per minute. And when I organize the data based on what you've seen, I should have 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. I have to reorganize it because when you saw on the other slide, they were all out of order. And once I do that, I just got to match up the beats per minute. And then I got to put them into a graph. So there are different types of graphs. We've got line graphs. These are best for continual change, what we just said. Then there's bar graphs. Those are to compare this versus this, colors versus each other. Pie graphs, those are good for showing percentages out of a whole. All right, based on that, we want a line graph. So I'm picking this graph for my, my information. I'm going to label the axes. Always want to do what you changed, what you measure. That's how you're going to want to do it up. What you changed, what you measured. And then you're going to punch it in. But here's the thing. You have to make sure that when you are putting or labeling the lines that they are in even intervals or odd and not odd intervals. You want to do like 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 20, 30, 40, 5, 10, 15, 20. Even sometimes you got to go by threes, 3, 6, 9. And don't do when you're going up, if you've changed it differently, don't do like 5, 9, 20, 23. You want to keep it at an even pace. So when I go to put these in, I'm going to go by 5s. And I'm going to start with 0 at the bottom. However, you have to recognize 0 is not over here, so it cannot be a point or anything in my graph. It's just kind of like a placeholder. And then on the side, I want to organize this out so that this stretches the whole graph, but doesn't go too far. So I did 100, 150. I went by 25s. And this is kind of like a placeholder. This is like I would put a little like heartbeat symbol almost there just to say that I went from 0 to 100. And then I'm going to start plugging in the dots for each spot. So at 5, I want to go 102, and I'd put a dot right there. 10, 154, I go about there. 15 and 200, which is really nice. I put it right there. 20 and 260, right about there. And 25 and 300, right there. And I took up basically the whole chart. I'm going to connect from here to here, and I'm not going to go any further. One of the things I think would be great for you is looking at this checklist. Check it off as you go. Make sure you have a title for your graph. I didn't put a title on that graph. It would have been temperature versus beats per minute, right? Make sure you have that. You have both the independent and dependent variable labeled, which you did. Axis is labeled with words and units. You definitely have to have those units. That's why if you look at here, there's degrees Celsius per minute. Labeled with evenly spaced scale. That's what I was talking about. 2, 4, 6, 8, 5, 10, 15, 20, 100, 50, 200 has to be even. Did you pick the appropriate graph size? A graph, like a bar graph, would have been bad for that. You wanted a line graph. Does your graph need a key? If there's only one line, you don't need a key. If you have multiple lines, you need a key. Is your graph neat? Make sure others can understand your data. Dots are nice and simply done. It is neat. All right, so that is it for the notes. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask, and I hope you guys have a great day.